Serious, men who have left abusive relationships, what's your story? I left the day I wanted to hit her back. Of course she denies that it was abuse. What are you, some kind of P? A little girl hitting makes you scared? Nope. The thought of all the bulls I would go through if I level you scares me. We got together at the age of 14. First 3 years of our relationship it was perfect, I couldn't ask for a better girlfriend. But something changed in her, she controlled all my finances. She cheated on me. She dictated who I could be friends with and then started hitting me. The first time she hit me I had refused to eat a burrito we bought because I wanted to save it and eat it later. She slapped me in the face and I brushed it off. Crap like this happened loads but I brushed it off and didn't care about it. One that stood out was I didn't indicate on an empty road at 2 AM and she punched me in the face and split my eye open. That was a real eye opener, excuse the pun. Eventually she broke up with me after 6 years and I sat and thought about everything and realized I was abused. It hurt but hey ho, life goes on. I've got a beautiful girlfriend now who's really understanding and actually makes me happy. Here's to happy endings, eh? If I could give any advice to guys being abused, just leave and don't look back, it's not worth it, just go. I was told she was batshit crazy when we met. Her old friends told me that she would wait outside of her ex's house and cry, or post his personal things onto Facebook. I asked her and she told me that it was a lie and her ex had been physically abusive to her. At first things were okay. I dismissed a lot of her weird mannerisms to her trauma from her previous relationship. Then things got worse. Losing it at me for not replying for 1-2 hours. Yelling at me in front of my family and friends for talking to her female friend. I just kept telling myself it was because of her past. Oh man, I really tried to help her. I helped her get into counseling. I even started a whole charitable foundation that helps those facing domestic abuse for her. It just kept getting worse and worse to the point where she would be cussing me out in front of my family weekly. And one night she drunkenly hit me. I was drunk too and had to hold her to make her stop, which made me feel bad because I firmly believe a man shouldn't ever be physical with a girl. I don't know why I kept forgiving her even though she would do this regularly and would wait outside my house and refuse to leave when inside. A few times I had to call her dad to come get her. She always blamed it on alcohol, her previous abuse, or said I would forgive her once she made me feel good. I ended it after that, but we saw each other a few times after. The last straw was when she met me for dinner. We had already broken up, already drunk, and started yelling at me. When I tried to leave after paying the tab, she chased me outside, clinging onto the outside of my pickup truck while I tried to drive. As soon as I stopped she got in and almost made me crash 3-4 times. The only reason she left me alone was because that night I was smart enough to videotape her beating me, ripping my clothes off, biting me, and told her I would be sending them to her family and friends if she ever contacted me again. I'm not the best man, but no one deserves to be treated like that. I still run the charity for domestic abuse. Stay strong folks. And maybe you can help a few men along the way with your charity. I didn't realize how bad it was till well after it was over. She hit me with her car twice, and I still stayed with her. I was convinced she was the only one who would ever love me. An ex-GF of mine was emotionally abusive and controlling. Demanded that I do what she wanted and when she wanted. Put so many double standards in our relationship. We were together for around 2 years. I had such low self-esteem that I went along with it, believing her that I was at fault and to blame. When I finally started to get my confidence up and push back against her rules and abuse, she broke up with me. Clearly couldn't be with someone who wanted fairness and equality. Now I am happy, stronger, and have a husband in a perfect relationship. Congratulations on getting away, and yay for your husband and new relationship. My previous relationship, before my one day bride, I was in a LTR with an abusive girl. She was raised in an abusive household, where her father often got drunk and beat the mom. Quite often, he was still abusive when I went to see them. The guy didn't hide it from anyone. She was raised with the thought that when you do something incorrect, there will be repercussions. Anyway, we moved in together rather quickly. She was hard to live with from the onset. My family liked her, but distrusted her. My friends met her once, and she got drunk and my friends never wanted to see her again. She was not an alcoholic per se, but she drank when problems arose. The first event where our relationship went from declining to toxic happened in the first 6 months together. I forgot to pick up milk from the store across the street, and she threw a frame of us at me and the glass broke and I had a scar on my foot. That was also the first time I made an excuse to my family so their impression of her does not get worse. After then, it opened her door to hit me, punch me, throw glasses at me, throw a hammer at me, throw a leveler at me, broke my dresser by throwing it down, broke my phone, broke her phone that I bought her. After a 3-year relationship, I left telling her that I'm calling it quits. Ever since then, I have doing much better. I'm in a relationship that I can say that I am 120% happy, but I feel like sometimes I'm so afraid of doing something bad, even though she is so accepting of me and is the best thing that has ever happened to me. I left when I woke up with her hands around my throat. She was suicidal and bipolar. I wanted to help her through her issues. It wasn't until I realized that I facing the reality that I could be killed that I left. I never hit back and rarely defended myself. It's been over a year now and to this day I have trouble even talking to a woman, much less want to date one. I still blame myself for not being able to help her the way that she needed it. When I left I called the police to escort me out, and thank God I didn't restrain her or block. The cop said if she had any marks I would have gone to jail. I called so that I could leave without any more trouble and almost got arrested for it. What's worse is that when I explained the situation to the officer, he responded with, "Did you do something to deserve it? No one under any circumstance deserves abuse. No matter who is the victim. There is a real stigma against male victims of domestic abuse." TLDR of the relationship, so we can get to the part you actually want to hear. We dated, we fought all the time. She would regularly slap and hit me. I always said don't do that. Eventually she got drunk and punched me in the face hard enough to break my nose. After about 1.5 years of dealing with that crap I lost it. I punched her back that time. I only hit her the one time. As soon as I did I freaked out like oh crap, I'm going to jail. I got her in the side of the head, pretty much right on her ear. She ended up with, as far as I know, temporary damage to her inner ear. She lost a lot of hearing in that ear and had trouble balancing for a while. Again, temporarily. So she called the police on me and ended up being the one in trouble after my story was confirmed by half-healed bruises all over me where she would throw things or hit me. And she didn't have a scratch besides the ear thing to back up a fake story that I hit her all the time and she hit me in the face in self-defense after I punched her. I didn't press charges, and we went our separate ways. Until more men press charges, women will keep getting away with this crap. We were married for 12 years. 2 kids, one with special needs. Things started well, but I was the proverbial frog in the pot. I'd be at work all day, and she and the kids would be at the zoo, or the mall, or the museum, the library, the park. I remember one time she chewed me out for about 12 hours because I bought a sweet tea from McDonald's. When she dropped only $200 at the Disney store for the 3rd time that week. Took out about 15 credit cards, maxed them all out. Thankfully, only the big ones had my name on them. She was a hoarder, to boot. Literally had the entire garage full, top to bottom, of plastic knickknacks and toys for the kids that never even got opened or given to the kids. When I made any kind of decision, she'd end up crying. I let my 4-year-old go out in the front yard once. We were right behind him to climb in the car. She calls him back in, clutches him to her and starts howling. Eventually I figure out that she was crying because she was so sad and frightened to learn for the first time that I didn't care if he lived or died, because he might get hit by a car. And if I protested that I wasn't, I just always had to win the arguments instead of letting her win. I literally could do nothing right, from building her a headboard for a gift to forgetting the right condiment at fast food places. Physically, she'd just either pinch me until I bled, or toss me something that magically managed to hit me in the balls every time. She made friends with every person I met, completely took over my social life, had to be there. There was no escape. I'd be talking with someone, then she had this trick where she would join the conversation, then turn her body, and the whole group would shift places as she talked, until she had her back to me, and I was literally once more outside the circle. Finally, I started having full-blown panic attacks whenever she was around, and went to walk out of the room and kill myself during an argument. She wouldn't even let me do that in peace. So I found an apartment, opened a bank account in my own name, and moved out. I had to figure out what was wrong with me. Turns out, it was only due to the fact that I was married to a harpy. Made the divorce merry heck a year later, and it's still a nightmare getting time with the kids, but progress is slowly being made. 3 years now, and she still managed to get invited to my family reunion tomorrow. And she told me last week that she got my daughter's Make-A-Wish offer finalized. They're all going to Hawaii without me. And yet, it's still a vast improvement from what it once was. I don't blame her for it. I'm pretty sure I know where it all came from. But every day I don't see her, think about her, or am reminded she exists is a very, very good day. Goddamn bro, I'm sorry you had have to deal with that. Was with her for about 18 months to 2 years. She started off okay, but as the relationship progressed she became very controlling and emotionally abusive. I wasn't allowed to go out with friends often. I had to reply to her texts ASAP. I had to come to hers after work most of the time. She always wanted trips away, leading me to accumulate a £2,500 overdraft in my bank account. At its worst point I tried to leave her 3 times. She would then threaten suicide to make me stay. One time I broke up with her and she sat in front of her bedroom door and wouldn't let me leave. She was a very large girl and I really would not have been able to move her. Got to the point that during an argument I nearly punched her in the face. After this I dumped her by text. Dumped her and never looked back. Blocked her on everything and went out and fricked as many willing girls as I could. I'm now happily engaged to a new girl. Until this happened I never understood how somebody couldn't just leave a relationship when crap like suicide threats are made. Trust me, until you've been there you have no idea what it's like. I'm glad to hear you're doing so well now. I'm sorry you went through all that crap, but maybe one day you can be the supportive friend some other dude needs to help him leave an abusive partner. Oh man, where to start? Here are some of the highlights. One time we were having a disagreement. Nothing heated, just a difference of opinion. She hauls off and slaps me full force in the face. When I asked WTF, she replied that she seen it on TV and thought that would be the best way to solve this issue. I was holding my infant son and she got mad at me for some reason. She threw a plate at me. I had to turn my body and deflect the plate with my free arm so that it didn't hit my son or I. Once the plate shattered, she accused me of hitting the plate with my arm and breaking it. Another time she was mad for some reason and threw a plate full of food directly at me. Plate broken, food went everywhere. On a more mundane level, our relationship was punctuated with more bouts of her kicking, yelling, wild accusations, threats to leave, that sort of stuff. She was the love of my life, perfect in every way until she got upset. She was terribly jealous for no real reason, both verbally and physically abusive. I miss her dearly. I stayed with her for 4 years hoping that she would change. We went to one counseling session and she didn't feel like more sessions were needed. We broke up for the final time. I tried to break up with her many times and attempted to remain as friends. She was furious after I introduced her to a co-worker as my friend. I knew at that point that I couldn't talk to her anymore. It has been a year and my heart is still broken. I lost someone so dear to me due to abuse and it's probably the toughest thing I've had to deal with. It has been extremely tough but helps to talk about it. Thank you for talking about it. She wasn't physically abusive, but she was pretty emotionally abusive and just overall too much for me to handle. We were in college at the time and she became heavily addicted to benzos and alcohol. She also cheated several times and would look through my phone constantly. I was kind of passive about it until she really started to hurt herself. So I convinced her mom that she needed to go into rehab. Once she was in a secure facility and became a little more level-headed, I told her that this wasn't what either of us needed. We broke up and all my friends suddenly started saying how relieved they were that we broke up when they never spoke a word during the whole thing. So now I stay single and lonely. I had an abusive ex or two. They try to make you cut ties. The friends that stay around either like to comment on your follies or they are legitimately there for you. She had mental health problems that I helped her with. As time went she took advantage of my empathy and became more abusive and controlling. I don't really want to revisit it in detail, so I won't describe what happened, but I can talk about the reaction afterwards. I suspended my studies at university because of it and struggled with recovery. According to my doctor, I have PTSD. I spoke to the university about what happened, but they refused to do anything, so I have had to return to my studies with the risk that I would see her again. Their excuse was that it's not happening now, so we won't do anything, even though it was against their regulations. Of course, they wouldn't say that for any other activity that had happened in the past, like stealing. The excuse makes no sense and is against their own regulations, so I can only assume it is gender discrimination. I'm still sick and will never completely recover. There is little assistance for me. Women's aid lobbies the Home Office to deny funding to men's support groups. It's not the trauma that's bad. Knowing that the people with power think that I don't deserve help is depressing. The leader of the opposition in my country actually defended his domestic abuse shadow minister when it emerged that she had been cautioned for domestic abuse. She resigned, but he later appointed her the shadow women and equalities minister. If you want to change things, call out the people responsible for this and ask politicians to stop the discrimination. She was never physically abusive, but very manipulative. It's kind of sad, because she didn't start out that way. Her parents had gotten a very messy divorce when she was younger, and she refused to see the signs that her dad was still an addict. It also gave her huge attachment issues. When we first started dating, I was the clingy one. However, as she got more attached to me, weird things started happening. She would tell me that all of her friends didn't like me and didn't want to be around me. She would get mad at me for not calling her at night. Things like that. Eventually she began to see that I was starting to fall out of love, and this drove her crazy. She would call me randomly hyperventilating and crying, but would never tell me exactly why. She would completely ignore her mom just so she could spend more time in the same place as me, and a lot more. I feel bad for everything she went through, but that was the most stressful time of my life. I couldn't hang out with her without feeling frustrated with the situation, but I was afraid to break it off with her because of what she might do. Currently in a similar situation. We got into an argument. She punched me in the face. I left the house, went to my office where I work at, and figured out how the frick I'm getting out of the apartment. Finally moved in with some friends. Dealt with cheating when my daughter was born. Got over it after a year or so. More cheating on multiple occasions in the next 6 years. Wife was physically abusive to both me and child, throwing things, could be anything near her hands, knife, glass bowls, phone, cups, forks, she would throw even if my daughter was right next to me. Had to call cops once but didn't get better even after being arrested once. Financially abusive as well. Personal shopping all the time. $50 caviar on personal clothing. Over $100k in 2 years. Massive credit card debts. Would spend $500 without thinking for a minute on clothes, but ask her to register my daughter to a $60 a month clay modeling class and it would be a "it's too expensive" debate. On Facebook all the time. Life was just selfies. Completely ignore the kid. Would not feed my daughter food. Hit her if she pestered her a bit, but had a ton of time for Facebook. I would walk into the house like I entered a war zone, not knowing what would trigger the next throwing, hitting, shouting. Taking my kid out to park or a beach used to be a fight as well. It was something or the other. Too hot, too cold, too windy. All along I always tried to stay and resolve, thinking at the fact that my daughter would not know a family. One day I realized enough is enough. My daughter is much better off being in a sane environment growing up. Nothing good can come being in a war zone all the time. Massive difference in behavior, thinking, manners in my own child since I filed for divorce and asked wife to move out. If you are in one, get out of it ASAP. Unless there is willingness and acknowledgement of issues, it won't get better. And if you don't get meaningful effort, then for sure nothing's gonna change. Unlike me, don't sit on it for 6 years. Most important thing to remember, however, is our legal system is extremely biased against men in things like divorce, so be super extra cautious with anything you do and don't make the mistake of being even remotely physical in any way. Physically abusive towards a child is where I draw the line. Hitting me is no acceptable, but if you hit and abuse my kid, I will not hesitate to leave you. Girlfriend of a year and 7 months. First few months were okay, nothing great, nothing bad. But then it started to get worse as she joined my hobbies. She would punch and hit me in the gut, even if my friends and teammates were standing 10 feet away. She wailed on me. She was relatively weak and it rarely ever hurt, but the point was that she would always be taking swings at me. A year down the line and it turns to slapping and shots to the groin. I was getting fed up with the abuse and not being treated like a human being. 2 months later I dumped her, both for the abuse and for emotionally cheating on me, and she just calmly took herself out of my life. I've seen her twice since then and I never spoke a word to her. To be fair, my relationships was abusive on both sides. I was just emotionally abusive, but I shall explain. High school sweetheart, loved her to death. Then 8 years and she started to change and so did I. My depression and anxiety kicked into hyperdrive. I was having panic attacks and low days where I just wanted to be alone for hours at a time, and she was a very emotionally needy person. After a few months of it, she decided that the only way to get me to be more attentive was to separate me from as many friends as possible. She would tell me lies about what others were saying and that I was coming off as a creepy and clingy with a few of her female friends. Those friends told me later after we broke up that she was lying, as they had never felt uncomfortable around me and that she was just using my insecurities to isolate me to only focus on her. In the end, when she started screaming at me to stop hanging out with my female friends even though she was going to concerts and movies every week with her guy friends, I put my foot down and ended it. It sucked. I still feel like I lost my best friend, but after talking with several counselors and psychologists who slowly pointed out all the crappy manipulative behaviors, I realized that we just weren't right for each other and it was better that we left. I did get some closure with her and we are okay terms. She has a kid now and seems a bit more level-headed. I just got on with one earlier this week. It started out perfect and within 1 month she had moved in due to her dad kicking her out. She had nothing. No car, no job, not even a bank account. I helped her achieve all of those things except the cat, which I was helping her save and pay for eventually. It started out as verbal abuse during arguments and quickly got physical. She'd hit me and bite me and I'd have to forcibly restrain her. I had ankle surgery earlier that month and she kicked my cast. I still stayed for almost another year. I lost friends and lots of opportunities. It only finally ended because she went to go stay at her dad's and had a guy pick her up to go frick. After I found that out the next day, a switch in my brain flipped and I realized how much time and energy I've wasted on such a negative person. It was definitely a learning experience. I'm glad you got out of that relationship. The way you approached the situation of moving out was pretty much the absolute best way to do it: quick, clean, and done. And since you had a realization moment, it was not all a total waste of time. Believe me, I hope you are able to restore some friendships and make new ones now. She was manipulative and would hit me. I hit her too once. Not proud of myself for that. The final straw was when she compared me to a guy she slept with on one of our frequent breaks, saying, well, he does such and such. I just straight up told her I couldn't take it anymore. She had degraded me over a year, broken me down, and at this point I was a shell of my former self. I apologized for how I was during the relationship about half a year later. I told her I regretted hitting her and I was, and still am, sorry for doing something so crappy. She told me to frick off basically, but whatever. I said what I needed to say. Haven't seen or spoken in like 5 years. The abuse was both physical and mental, mostly from her side, but I wasn't an angel either. I'm finally happy now though, and I'm going to get married soon. It's been a journey. If you feel you're in an abusive relationship, get out now. It can ruin you for years after. You aren't a bad person for wanting out of a bad relationship. Found an apartment. Got my buddies to move all of my stuff at once and play the role of witness when she went ballistic. Had my best friend stay at my new place with me at the new place because she was sneakier than I thought and tailed us to my new place. She broke my window with her fist and bled a lot. My friend started to call the police and she ran. Hid out for a while after that. Living nightmare. I suffered mostly emotional abuse during my marriage, but my ex did once throw a phone at me when she was angry about our kids' baby pictures not coming out well. For the rest of our time together she maintained she was right to do it because I'd made her angry. It was just deception after deception. I was tired of getting gaslighted about everything, so one day I just packed my stuff and left. That's the TLDR version. This is kinda complicated. We were a couple for 2 years, and we were into kinky stuff. She was the dominant one. Now, it should be known that in those relationships, there are boundaries and limits that cannot be passed, and those are set at the beginning of the relation. It all went well for a while, until she started to push those boundaries, and even trespassing them. Without going into details, those were hard limit and do not that shouldn't have broken. She started to confuse our kinky roles with everyday lives. She pretended to treat me like her sub at the mall, with family and friends around and a lot of others inconvenient situations. When confronted about this, she started to rage and yell. She had completely lost sight on the separation between kinky and normal life. No regrets, she was a B. Not sure if this counts as abusive, but she would periodically ghost me for long periods of time. Like 1 week if not responding to my texts, then question if I still liked her when I started texting less. It really took a toll on me and I felt like crap when she did it and she knew it. Yet she would keep doing it. A family member left his controlling wife after 19 years together because he suddenly realized he couldn't handle it anymore, and she was refusing to. I got fat while we were dating. We have been broken up for years now, but I still have self-image issues for being so fat. I knew if we stayed together, one of us would end up in jail. I just had to get out even though I was scared. Good for you. That takes a lot of courage. Not physically abusive, but mentally. She would always vaguely threaten self-harm whenever we got into a fight, and would say things along the lines of "I'm the best you'll get," etc. I didn't really realize it was abusive and one-sided until she was forcing me to take a selfie with her. Kind of a silly turning point, but in hindsight it is really clear. I didn't want to take a picture, and she was like, "Come on, give me a chittish wimp and shitty's X classic selfie." I had then realized every picture we'd taken, along with pretty much everything else, was done and redone until she was happy with it. Nothing I'd ever wanted was ever done. Everything she wanted was. I realized she was all take and no give, and whenever I wanted something, we'd get into an argument and she'd threaten something awful. Eventually, I told her, "I'm sorry, but this isn't good for me. I can't be held responsible for your actions. I'm not your dad. You can't blame me for you hurting yourself, and it wouldn't be fair for you to do so." And then I left. We'd gotten into an argument about hunting and the ethics of hunting versus factory farmed animals. She said she couldn't believe I'd hurt an animal. We got into this massive argument before we'd even reached our destination from her house, and I'd left her that day and told her not to contact me anymore. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.